I see people attempting to leverage habits to manage themselves into a box, which is an idea of what they think will make them happy, which is usually an idea that they've had for a while that has never made them happy.
Habits are a means to an end that people forget and think that they are a means in and of themselves, right? That habit is meant to facilitate the thing you want.
If instead you're spending time to be more focused, to be more intentional about what am I trying to accomplish and what's going to get me there, it's very rare that it's going to be 10 minutes of a task that I can click off on a habit tracker.
What are we talking about today?
Habits? Did you want to talk about habits?
Do we want to? Like, my only hesitation, I think habits would be a better conversation than rest. My only hesitation is I know, like, this is a hot topic. So if a last minute pivot means we don't feel prepared, like, I want to make sure we feel like we're going to do habits justice.
I don't care.
Corey's going to show up the same no matter what.
Correct.
Yeah, same level of prep. I guess, Justin, actually the question's for you, I think.
Well, the thing that tripped over me for habits was, like, you and I, Ricky, spoke last time, and I was like, I don't want to talk about habits because I think that it's talked about too much. And over the weekend, I was like, oh, that's the angle, right? Like, we talked about so much how the episode benefits from being, like, having a little bit of, like, contrary energy. And I was like, yeah, for me, the conversation on habits is like, I think we talk about habits too much. I don't think they're as important as they're made out to be. And so I genuinely believe that. So I can really step onto that. So then it's like, okay, do we feel like we could see the arc of an episode, or we feel good with that?
Like, habits are overrated? Like, that could be on the thumbnail.
That's my take. I think we talk about them too much.
Well, I think there's a difference between we talk about it too much.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. This is what I mean, right? So that's the question is, do we want to have that conversation today, or do we want to have a little bit more prep coming into it?
Listen, can I be real? Can I be real for a second with the three of us?
Yeah.
Because of the work that the three of us all do, the amount that we all have to talk about fucking habits means that we don't. You don't talk about habits? You don't have to talk about habits?
If somebody tries to talk to me about habits, I literally am like, I take them deeper immediately. See, this is good. This is good content.
We're already using it. We're already in the episode, Justin.
So it sounds like we should probably just do habits today.
We're already in it.
Yeah.
Welcome to No Clear Answers, where we explore all challenges leaders, creatives, and people face and break down preconceived self-notions. No Clear Answers.
You know who the fuck we are.
I'm Ricky, bitch.
Yeah. I am Corey. I am Dr. Corey motherfucking Wilkes. That's it.
And that's our intro.
And
we got Captain Justin Mulvaney.
Empress Ricky Goldenberg.
Okay, so we're actually doing this right now. We're actually
it just happened, Justin.
Okay, so
that was the lead-in. We're talking about habits.
We're in it. So today's episode's about habits. We don't know what we're going to talk about, but we in our discussion of if we wanted to have this episode or not, we started having a great conversation. So before we dive in, this is your reminder that we would so appreciate it if you were to like the episode, subscribe, rate us on your favorite platform, share us with a friend. All of those things really help us with algorithms and things like that. So if you're a fan of the show, also, we recently had a conversation Ricky and I did with how much juice and energy it gives us to keep going when we see you comment and subscribe and interact with us. So all of that's appreciated because it lets us know that people care about the show and energizes us to keep going.
I also think that we have had some really fun interactions that are good to share out. Like, I just had someone text me this week and was like, I have to do Myers-Briggs for work this week. And I'm like, this is bullshit. And they had just listened to our episode. And so they were talking about how much fun it is to have listened to that episode and then do the 16 personalities test and decide what or how they were going to work with that or not work with it during their offsite that week. Incredible. That was such a fun little note.
We also had somebody, we can't share it with you, but secretly reply to our Myers-Briggs episode for their patrons and send it to us, a Myers-Briggs expert who basically was like, I think Myers-Briggs is sick and I disagree with you all, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, so, it was hilarious.
Yeah, it was great. So Anywho, moving on, we're talking about habits. I think habits are overrated. I mean, maybe just a good starting point is like, how often do you guys talk about habits in your coaching? How often, I guess for my personal curiosity would be like, how often do your clients come in being like, I want to talk about habits? And how often do you find yourself bringing them to habits?
Okay. Full disclosure. I think that if anyone was like, I want to work with you on my habits, I'd be like, no, that's not a good idea. Like, do you want a productivity coach? Do you want an accountability buddy? Like, it doesn't have to be me. I think that that's a pretty surface level discussion to have with me. That being said, I think that sometimes when I'm working with folks, there is work that they're trying to make some sort of identity shift, which has habitual nature within it. And then we will talk about like, well, what would that look like this week? What would you want to start kind of putting into place this week, recognizing that we can't be perfect every day and, you know, progress over perfection. And now I feel like I'm just like using terminology that's like bullshit, but I would not work with someone who's just like, I want to get better. I want to get better at my habits. I'd be like, no.
So for you, Ricky, habits are like part of the integration process, but you're not necessarily explicitly talking habits.
No.
Yeah. Corey, what about you?
So, I don't frame or position myself as a productivity guy. So people rarely come to me for habits. And a lot of people who do come to me already know all the productivity shit. And they're like, despite all the things that I know, I'm still stuck, or I'm at a plateau, or I can't figure out what the next phase of my life or business is going to look like. That is what I need help with. And a lot of people, like, they'll even say like, I know all the productivity things. I know how to do X, Y, or Z. And, you know, I have an action bias. So like I am good at executing. However, despite all of this, I have now hit this stuck point, right? Which is always good that like, okay, cool. I'm to go over like super basic shit that you could just read from fucking Google. But habits, as far as like routines and actions, obviously come up, right? I typically frame it more as like commitments of like, what are you going to commit to this week that will meaningfully move you closer to, you know, a values aligned life and business, that kind of thing, or more meaningful work. It's more so that like, what are you willing to commit to? What does that actually look like? Right. And generally that is going to be a habit or a way of showing up, an action you are taking, right? So depending on how like broadly you want to define a habit, yes. But as far as like, here are 7 habits you need to practice this week, absolutely fucking not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there's also, especially when it comes to habits, you're making, Justin, I want to hear from you, but there's a couple things that come up for habits with a lot of folks is that there's like a perfectionism nature to it, that they're like, oh, I have a habit tracker. Like you can get printable habit trackers that you say like, these are the 10 habits that I'm going to do. And when I do them, I cross them off. And when I don't, I can't cross them off. And like, I feel like I'm dealing with like a sticker chore chart for a toddler. And so oftentimes people come in from that direction, that it's like, I'm creating habits to create habits versus a little bit of saying, oh, I know what productivity looks like. I'm actually trying to get better clarity around what's important to me and how can I actually put a vote towards that with the actions that I take each day that Corey's kind of talking about. Justin, what about you, besides the fact that you're not into them?
No, I'm not into them at all. Well, it's not that I'm not into them, right? I think there's so many thoughts that I have around this. No, very rarely do people come to me talking about habits. There's sometimes like there have been a few clients where we've had a bit of a focus on habits, but there's such a real like limitation to a habits focus versus, like you said, Ricky, identity focus. That episode came out the day that we're recording today, which is like such a layer deeper. Yeah, habits just feel like 101. They're like very basic. And usually, like you said, Rick, I see people attempting to leverage habits to manage themselves into a box, which is an idea of what they think will make them happy, which is usually an idea that they've had for a while that has never made them happy. And so frequently I feel like the point when people are showing up for coaching is actually when they need to unlearn the meta habit of using habits to put themselves into a box and find a new way of being. Another way I could put this, and I'm risking getting too esoteric, is I usually, without actually saying it, I find as a coach, I'm helping people with deeper psychological and cognitive habits without them realizing it. There's a deeper layer of habit than going to the gym every day. It's the habit of like, how are you with yourself? How do you respond to yourself? How do you respond to the voice in your head? How are you when you get triggered? It's habits at a much deeper layer, and we're almost never using habit language around that.
I think it's also, I know we don't do this as much anymore, but I also think it helps to sort of define habit, right? Because like for some people, I think a habit it actually is around a thing that I do every single day and I put it on a list, and ultimately, if you talk about identity instead, which yes, we talked about today, or if you talk about your goals or what makes you happy, habit has a language around it that feels really controlling to me. It has this like kind of perfectionist nature that it's like, oh, this is something that I do every single day. The things that I do every single day is like, I drink coffee, I put on clothing, I brush my teeth, right? These are like the activities that are part of my everyday activities that I just do in order to exist in the world. Whereas the identity components are much more interesting because it's not a box that I tick off, right? It's more around, oh, I'm someone who is curious and therefore I like to always be learning each day, or I like to take on new challenges. And that's not like, did I take on a challenge today? Click, click. Yeah, habits just feel very contained for me in a way that is, yeah, I feel like I'm trying to manage myself when I'm talking about habits.
I think that habits are a means to an end that people forget and think that they are a means in and of themselves, right?
Yes.
So like a habit a habit defined as an action you take, a behavior you engage in, right? Period. Consistently, which if you want any kind of result, you tend to need consistency, right? That habit is meant to facilitate the thing you want. The thing you want isn't the fucking habit, right? Like something as simple as the habit is practicing guitar. The goal, like the ultimate thing you're wanting to do, isn't necessarily to practice the guitar. It's to be able to fucking play the guitar, right? Now you need to do that. You need to commit to it, right? But a lot of people, they get so caught up in like hacks, learning productivity hacks, learning the habit hacks, learning habit stacking, learning this, learning that. And it's like, okay, you have this fucking encyclopedia full of habits and hacks and productivity shit. What the fuck have you done with it other than started a blog on habits? And this isn't a knock to any specific person, right? Like absolutely not. That is my issue. Is it's like you haven't done anything. Again, it's like social media accounts that their only thing they ever sell you is how to grow on social media. It's this fucking circle jerk of the internet. Okay. That's the issue. But if you keep it in perspective of, I need to figure out what are the things I need to commit to on a consistent basis that will facilitate my ultimate thing I am trying to achieve or the person I'm trying to become, right? Like Atomic Habits sold 20 plus million copies for a very good reason. He made habits that are designed to facilitate the person you want to become and the life you want to have. He made that very concrete, very simple to implement. That's solid, right? Like in no way am I talking shit about James Clear. I am talking shit about the hundreds of thousands of James Clear knockoffs. It's just like, look, he did it first. He did it better. He didn't even do it first technically, but he did it better. Leave it the fuck alone. Leave it alone.
We love you,
One of my
James.
favorite experiences on the show is when Corey, mid-monologue, gets himself so worked up that he has to take a giant inhale that then rocks him into the second half of his monologue.
Yes, and then he does this.
Yeah,
he
he
just did
has
it.
to
He just did it.
self-soothe his face.
Or
You all need to
self-soothing.
come onto YouTube where
I
Corey
just watched
works
him
himself up
self-soothe
so
with
much
his physical.
that he has to rub his head to self-soothe and bring himself back down.
I-
But I agree with everything you said. I was going to go into a tear. You tore for me.
I want to hang out on the tear though, because I have a perfect example that I feel like is really helpful, which is okay, so if someone was listening to this and they were like, I still don't quite get where we're playing with this. The way I think about this is I'm trying to learn a new language. And so I use Duolingo. Duolingo is perfect for habits, in just habits, right? They're like, come into Duolingo every single day. The owl shows up, do your lesson. And the lesson is like, I would like a banana. A banana would be great. You're never going to fucking ask for a banana. You don't, and you're basically doing it every day. And you feel like you're learning the language because I'm doing it every single day and I'm checking that box off. And then literally someone tries to talk to you in the language and you're like, oh, I'm fucked. And that's what it makes me think of. Like a habit, if the habit isn't tied to leveling up and to understanding what the goal is to like serving the goal. And it's just something to tick off the box. And you're sitting here saying, my monkey is an architect versus, oh, I'm trying to learn a language. And therefore, okay, I'm going to work with people who speak the language. I'm going to go to classes. I'm going to memorize terminology. But the thing is that doing Duolingo makes you feel like you did it, gives you a little dopamine hit, pleases the owl, versus actually trying and going and learning that language usually requires like, oh shit, I got to go memorize 200 grammar words and I have to talk to someone for an hour every day. It's not as much fun. It's harder.
It's gamification.
Absolutely.
That is, and so this is related to like habit trackers shit, right? Because like all habit trackers that I've ever seen are gamified. The issue, the underlying theory of gamification that it is founded upon is you have to dangle a carrot or a cookie in front of somebody to get them to do things. So the assumption that is based on is that people are lazy sacks of shit. Now, we are cognitive misers, meaning we do try to find shortcuts and heuristics and things. Sure, because we intrinsically don't particularly care for effort on like a species-wide scale, yes. But the issue with that is then when you gamify something like a habit via habit trackers, that becomes the game, right? To gamify something means to turn into a game. What do you do with the game? You try to fucking win. How do you win? You keep doing the thing. But that moves you further away from your goal because your goal is no longer to learn a language. Your goal is to tick off those fucking boxes for something like Duolingo. I don't even think it's Duolingo. I don't fucking know y'all. You all could be fucking great. I have no idea. I tried Babbel once and just couldn't fuck with it. Just couldn't. Okay. Because it's like, and when I talk to anybody who actually has learned another language, they're like, go to the fucking country. Like literally, and I don't use this, like, I don't mean metaphorically or figuratively, literally everybody I've ever talked to who has legitimately learned another language, not one of them has learned it through a fucking app that is gamified. Not fucking one of them. So that is the thing of like, that is my biggest pet peeve with a lot of habit trackers is that they gamify the experience. And then that becomes your goal, is to win the game, not to actually do the thing you signed up to do in the first place.
When I said I was going to come in with counter habit energy on this episode, I thought I was going to be the only one. And now we're just taking a nuke to habits, and it's wonderful. I think you nailed every single point there, Corey. This is the issue with how we tend to hold habits, is they actually abstract you all these strategies, gamify trying to get a carrot in the moment as opposed to aligning to what you really want. It's this Duolingo versus going to the country. It's the difference between faux progress and efficiency and a framework versus what's actually effective. And usually when you start with a habits lens as opposed to what you really want, what you end up with is a really fancy architecture that doesn't actually get you where you want. Whereas if you start with what you want and just go, what's the most direct path there? Maybe habits are going to fall in place, but maybe it's, God, I want to learn Spanish. I should just go to Spain and spend a bunch of time in Spain if this is really what's most important to me. Or I should use an online program that actually has me speaking with native Spanish speakers. I might not build a fancy Duolingo habit streak, but I'm actually making real progress.
I think it also, when we talk about the gamification, it's such a little dopamine hit that it's fun, right? You get to cross it off and stick her to our chart. You get a toy at the end of it. I'm just kidding. That's like potty training for a toddler. But there is this component. Whereas if instead you say, well, what's the goal? The complexity is around, you actually have to be way more intentional around what am I trying to accomplish and how am I spending my time? The habit to me oftentimes is like, you have a long ass to-do list. You go through the admin tasks first because they're easy and they're smooth and you cross them off and you're like, look at me, I got 10 things off my to-do list. But the one that's been sitting on your to-do list for 6 months isn't getting any action because that one is actually hard. And so if instead you're spending time to be more focused, to be more intentional about what am I trying to accomplish and what's going to get me there, it's very rare that it's going to be 10 minutes of a task that I can click off on a habit tracker. It's more often that you're actually going to have to be super uncomfortable. You're going to have to learn new things. You're going to have to screw up a little bit. We might have to travel to Spain. We hide from that stuff because that feels suddenly we're in it, right? Like it's actually participating in it.
That's a really good point, Ricky, which is sometimes this whole, like a question that bats around to me is like, why do we reach for habits so much then? And like Corey said, I think there's a whole bunch of people on the internet who, because habits are sexy and applicable, what they use it to do is to sell you their ebook into their course, into their blah, blah, blah. And it works so well because habits won't actually move the needle for you. And they go, well, listen, if my ebook did, just sign up for my course. So I get why, from the seller standpoint, I think the question that becomes, why do I buy this? Why I feel like in my 20s, a lot of people in their 20s really get into this stuff. And I think what you're pointing to, Ricky, is what the habits narrative can sometimes do for us is give us a sense of progress without actually having to take the big risk. And so there's a protection. There's a way that I protect myself by going, okay, well, what are just the habits versus being like, yeah, but the habits aren't actually going to get you there. And if we let go of thinking of building habits, you're actually confronted with a big, scary thing that you have to do. That a focus on habits will keep skirting you around and, again, give you some dopamine hits, but not actually get you closer to the finish line, not get you closer to the summit.
Another thing, I think that gamification is a surrogate for discipline and accountability, right? Like, think of the thing you want to do, and then like, what is your actual goal here? And what do you actually need to do the thing, right? Like, what do you need to commit to? What do you need to actually develop discipline around to achieve consistency? Gamification is never that. It throws you so far off course, but it, like we said, it makes you feel good. It gives you a sense of accomplishment without actually accomplishing anything of merit. That is the huge piece to this. Is like gamification it's sexy, it's fun, but then that becomes the thing you're doing. You're not actually moving closer to your goal.
I think there's another thing. This feels true for me personally and for a subset of young people and people I work with, which is they reach for habits a lot when they actually don't know what they want. Because the narrative is like, if you just get your habits in place, you're going to feel better. And I think sometimes, again, if we think of habits as a protective blanket that we put on to avoid something scary, it may be taking the big risk, or it may be confronting, I don't know what I want next. I don't know what I want from my life. I don't know what I want in my career. So let me just try and put these habits in place, because if I put the right habits in place and I'm disciplined and I do this, I'm going to feel good. And it can give you a sugar high, but usually what you're left with is just a sense of hollowness, because sure, you've got this architecture of gamified habits and you still have no clue what you want.
I think it also creates a really strange relationship with the expectation on how we're sort of like moving and spending our time, right? A lot of times I'll talk to folks who are like, oh, I need to be more disciplined. I need to be more motivated. I need to be more focused. They're using discipline, consistency, motivation, focus. And they've created this thing that they're like, oh, I need to spend 1 hour on this activity every single day. And then when you dive in, you're like, well, what are you doing in that hour? They're not doing shit. They're not fucking doing shit. And you're like, all right, dude, like, what? Spend 5 minutes on something that's actually going to move it a little bit. Whereas for them, they're like, well, sometimes I get it done and sometimes I skip it. And it's like, of course, like, I think habit has this complexity around it also, that there's this idea that it's like, oh, I have to do it every single day. And if I don't, I've failed, right? Like, neither of you ever do anything fucking on social media or pop culture, but there's a great meme that it's like a guy at a concert trying to finish his Duolingo to save his streak. And I feel like that is the perfect example. Like, is he actually learning the language right now? No. Like, should he actually just be at the fucking concert and enjoying himself? Yes. Like, I think basically habits sometimes can mess up the way we prioritize our time and our effort and our energy, because we're so focused on meeting these sets of boxes to check off that we're not stopping and saying, okay, well, what do I want to do? Now, full disclosure, there are things that then if you say, hey, I want to get better at Spanish, then you might end up creating habits, but if they're in service of the goal, if they actually are saying, hey, you know what? I want to spend time on Spanish every single day. I want to travel to Spain. I want to start memorize terminology. I'm watching Spanish telenovelas. Like, then you're starting to move with a thoughtful approach versus I do Duolingo every day and therefore I am learning Spanish.
But if you're not winning the game, then you are losing the game. So if
Yes.
I'm using Duolingo and I go to a concert, I can't lose the game
Exactly.
of Duolingo.
No.
So I have to play.
Can I pivot us into a different question?
Justin, take us anywhere.
Something you said, Ricky. There's a couple of questions sitting around in here. One of which is, and I'll tell the story that got me here afterwards. Like, can we talk about the virtues and the vices of habits? So we've kind of like gone on like a little smash of habits. I noticed that there's a part of me here that's like, well, what contexts are habits really helpful and what contexts aren't they helpful? Like, what do we want to construct with habits and what do we want to deconstruct? And I'll give you the example that came to me is Ricky or Corey, one of you were like, that consistency, that like an hour every day. And I'll just use an example of a domain where I think that will tear you to shreds. And I found this. I have a newsletter. I've had it for years. And I used to have this thing where it's like, hey, I'm going to sit down and write at these scheduled times when I'm supposed to write. What I've learned is that's a really garbage way to try and write and do creativity. For me, what I do nowadays is usually it's like 3 p.m. on a Sunday and I go, this would be a really interesting article to write. And then I start writing it in my head and then I go, oh shit, it's coming. And then I, like a baby coming to be birthed, I sit down and usually within 30 minutes, there's the first cut of an article there. And so there's an argument there that's like, I'm resting on a foundation of consistency. I'm thinking about what to write consistently. But what I found is in really creative domains, trying to, and this runs counter to a lot of like the Twitter advice and what people say, like trying to schedule your creativity does not work for me. I don't think in creative domains it makes much sense to try and take this from a strict managing yourself boxed in habit approach.
Okay. Whoa. I'm sure Corey has opinions on this too, because he does a lot of writing. Corey, do you want to go first? Because I have thoughts on this, but I feel like Corey, do you write every day? Isn't that right?
This isn't strict to writing. This is just virtues and vices, but we can go from a writing angle.
I know, but I feel like this is actually a good example is leveraging writing and creativity, because I do think it plays out here. Corey, talk about your writing routine and then we can get in here.
Yeah. So I write every single day throughout the day, but for the purpose of this discussion, I don't schedule creativity. I block space. I block time to leave space for creativity. So I don't sit there and say, okay, I am going to fully write out my entire newsletter in this 4-hour block of time. I say, I have a 4-hour block of time to allow my mind to wander, to consider things, to identify patterns, to see observations, stories, things like that, and see what evolves. Right? There's this whole thing. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but like I think it was Stephen King or somebody. Is basically like, you never know when the muse is going to visit, but the muse needs to know where you're going to be when she decides to visit. He's like, so every day at 8 a.m. or whatever the fuck, from 8 to noon, I am in my office. So if she decides to visit that day, she will know where the fuck I am. right? That is how I see it. Of like, there are some days, which is incredibly frustrating, but there are some days I'm like, I didn't do fuck all today because the time I blocked to be creative, it was just one of those days where it just wasn't happening. I brain dumped a bunch of shit. I'm going to have to like sift through all this shit later, but I upheld my commitment to myself to keep this space. So my commitment is to the process, not the outcome. And that allows me to continue to maintain that commitment. Because you're right. Like if I committed to an outcome and I didn't hit that outcome, then I would feel like a failure. Then I wouldn't get that dopamine, whatever the fuck. It's like, no. I upheld my commitment to myself to keep this time sacred.
Yes. And I think so it's not like, oh, because I sit every single day and write, therefore I'm going to like this XYZ is the outcome. What you are creating is technically like a habit of sitting, right? I'm going to sit, I'm going to be present, I'm going to observe, I'm going to take in information. Maybe I'll read really good content. Maybe I'll write, maybe nothing will come up and it'll just be the time that I've given intentional focus to the opportunity for creativity, whether that's building the muscle or not. And there's something there. Like I think about Twyla Tharp, she wrote The Creative Habit, or Rick Rubin, Creative Act. Like both of them really talk about creating a habit, I guess, of creating space for creativity, right? But again, that has to do with I'm creating the space to create some movement, and yet I also can sort of interact with this in different spaces. And again, this is around building a skill set. And so if I said, oh, every single day I need to do something creative and then I tick it off if I've done a creative thing. Oh, I don't know, guys. I'm getting really tripped up now as we're talking. I fucking love when I get tripped up. I'm getting super tripped up because I do think that this is complex, right? Like if we talk about creativity, for example, then someone could argue Corey has a habit of working on his writing every single day. And so fuck you. He does have a habit of writing. Whereas Justin doesn't have the habit of writing because you kind of wait for inspiration to strike. Corey, do it. Come in here. Help me.
I personally do not conceive of it as a habit of writing.
What do you consider? Yeah, this is
the
it.
Point. It's
let's
how
make it
he
clear.
Holds it. It's how we hold it. This is it. It's not, if we get too intellectual about this, we lose it, but it's how are you holding and relating to what a habit is? Go, Corey.
So I'll go this way. So I am highly oppositional. Everybody knows this. And I think that a lot of times with habits, habit trackers, whatever, you basically turn yourself into a fucking Tamagotchi. And I don't know about you all, but I can never keep them bitches alive. Okay. And you end up micromanaging yourself. Well, I hate being micromanaged. So I've tried this shit before, but then I just end up getting resentful toward myself. It's like, I'm my own fucking boss. Why the fuck am I resentful to myself? Why the fuck am I micromanaging myself? Oh, because I got to do this fucking habit. Absolutely not. Writing is not a habit to me. And I know this sounds stupid, but like writing is legitimately like sort of a way of life. Like being a writer to me, right? Like, and everything that entails as part of that identity, right? We have an identity episode, but part of that is like, for me, writing isn't a habit. Writing is the thing I can't not do. I am compelled to do it. Now, because of that, I have created certain structures that allow me to commit to it in a way that I am intentionally progressing on a day-to-day basis. Because I can identify as a writer, but if I spend weeks and weeks without writing, am I still a writer, right? So I have built my day around facilitating that commitment I have made to myself that I'm going to write. But I do not and haven't really ever framed it as I have the habit of writing, because that's just like, so, you know, we were talking earlier, like, you know, you've kind of been on a bit of a vacation. When I go on vacation, I write, because a vacation where I am not allowed to write is not a vacation. It is just, I mean, not like an actual prison sentence, but like it is torture, and not in a good way, right? Because I have to write. I can't not write. So I don't think of it as a habit.
This is the difference, Corey. You're going, there's something I genuinely want. I feel compelled to do. It's a deep thing for me, writing. What is most in service to me getting writing out into the world? Well, it's for me to create space for creativity. Now, I'm not telling myself I need to sit down and write 600 words a day. I'm creating the conditions for that thing to emerge, which is actually what's the most effective ends for me to get writing out there. Again, you're not holding it habit first. You're finding the habit. You're letting it emerge from the thing that you most want. That for me, Ricky, is the difference. It's where is the quote unquote habit or repeated behavior emerging from? How are you coming to it? Versus what a lot of people do is, I should have a newsletter, I should write, therefore I should write for an hour every day, which is entirely different energetically in your system than how Corey's holding it.
Have to versus get to, almost sort of a thing. Of like,
want to versus have to. Yeah, want to versus should.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting there is recognizing, because it's not habit first. Habit first might look like, oh, I sit down every single day and I have to write for 1 hour and this is what I do. And then I'm mad, or I check it off and there's no real intention around it. For Corey, it's like, well, I am a writer, and that's how I sort of move through the world. And so each day I set aside time to create the space to be who I am, to be a writer. No?
Yes. I have another point when you're done.
Oh, okay. I was like, he's shaking his head. I thought that was like a beautiful rendition, Corey. We were fucking arguing over it.
That was Corey's oppositional nature coming out. You don't know me, Ricky.
I know. I was like, shit, Corey. We just known each other for a little while now. But the thing that's really interesting is exactly, Justin, what you're poking at, which is, where's the intention coming from? Because listen, like from someone else, right? Even in this moment, it's hard to delineate, right? If I exercise every day, is it my habit is to exercise every day? Or is it like, I actually love to build strength, and so I make time for that every day, and it's something that's important to me, and that could look like moving my body in this way or moving my body in that way. Or some days I just lie horizontal and I watch Bridgerton. Like it's actually around the intention behind the goal and who you are and how that shows up. It's not saying I need to do this thing every single day.
It's an energetic thing. It's like, does it feel expansive in how you're doing it, or does it feel contracting? It's what we said before.
Does it feel like it's a have to or a want to?
Are you managing yourself, or are you creating space for yourself to be aligned?
So last night, I don't know when this episode will come out, but actually last night, or the day before, whenever the fuck, a day or two ago, I don't know what the fuck the day is, I went to a friend's book launch party. And there were a lot of writers there and other types of creators. And, as the night went on, we, kind of not clicked up, but we kind of grouped up. And I sat there at a table with some of my favorite like writers of today. And people I've had the privilege to be able to become friends with the shit through like Twitter and living in Austin and things. And we were all talking about writing. Not one person talked about their habits. They talked about processes that they've developed that facilitate creativity, but not one person ever made it sound like it was like an obligation. Nobody talked about habits or optimizing or productivity. Everybody was like, this is what energizes the fuck out of me. These are the things I can't not do. These are, one of the people, he's like, I help write for this big name person. Let me tell you about his creative process. Here's what he does. And it's like, again, there were no habits. There were like, he wakes up, he'll walk in the pool, like do laps and shit in the pool as he's listening to a podcast or as he's surrounding himself with great art. And then that informs his creative process for the type of work he does specifically. Nobody talked about habits, but everybody there was an incredible writer. And then there was me, which, I don't put myself in some category, but that was the thing. Like nobody talked about fucking habits. That's the fucking point. Nobody talked about gamification, habits, optimization, none of that. But every single one of these people lived that life because it was fully aligned with what they wanted to do.
Rick Rubin's book. If y'all are getting fired up, I would say go read it. It's a great book. And just in the sense, Justin, you can disagree with me.
I couldn't get past the first chapter, but I'm bad with nonfiction books these days. So.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about fiction books later. Anyway, the book is basically just recognizing that. I love it. Corey's holding it up, but the book is so that book is another example similar to Atomic Habits for James Clear, which is kind of like blazed through communities. that book also has plays through communities. And when you read it, it makes sense. It's because it helps you recognize that creativity is not as controlling as you believe it should be, right? Like that we all have the spaciousness for creativity. And a lot of it is around just connecting with yourself and others and nature and being in connection. And so I think that for a lot of us, we talk about habits. It's a protective measure. I think that we sort of use it because we want to optimize our lives and we want to make sure that we're like productive and we're on the grind and that we're doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing with bunny ears on, supposed to be doing.
We want to know that we're going to make progress when very frequently real progress comes from going into the unknown.
Yes. I think that it's a protective measure. It's sort of saying, oh, well, like I need to cultivate this habit and then therefore I will win, right? It's the gamification that Corey's harping on is like, there's this thought process that it's like, oh, well, if I get these things, then I will win. It's like real life is so much messier than that. If instead we're thinking about, well, where am I trying to go? And can I start moving in that direction? That movement alone, which does not require a printed out habit tracker that we get to cross things off, that movement towards that direction, that is the behavior. That's the identity shift. That's the coming into who you want and should be, I guess.
I have 2 points and then I want to move us to another question. Around this protective thing, it's like, I'll tell you every moment when I'm in something where I shift from, I'm going to try and make this a habit that I do regularly. And I unlearn that too. I'm going to do it I'm going to create the conditions for it to arise and then do it when I feel called, is scary. Because there's always the voice in me that goes, well, what if I just don't feel called to do it? What if the muse just doesn't come? Or what if it's not good? And what I'll say is that does happen. Corey said it earlier. There are days where I create the conditions to write and then just garbage comes out. And there are days where I create the conditions to write and absolute magic comes out that couldn't if I could schedule it. So there is a way where when you do this shift, you are inviting in the unknown. And sometimes the unknown, you don't make progress. And sometimes you make explosive progress. So it's the shift from the linear to the exponential. The other thing I'll say is like a story around this is for many, many years, me and caring about consciousness and awareness and all this stuff, I had a meditation habit. I would try and meditate every day. I don't do that anymore. And I would say I am more aware and awake than I ever was. Because when I actually sat in and aligned with that goal, like Corey said, it was like a shift from I'm going to meditate in the morning and have this be a chance to up my awareness to I'm going to treat my life like a meditation. I'm going to treat life like this practice of enhancing awareness. Now, sometimes I meditate when I want to, but what I found is the actual effective thing for me was to just use my life as a meditation, to stop when I notice I'm triggered, to stop when I notice I'm tied up, to stop when I notice I'm stuck and do my work right there, rather than trying to create this meditation habit and gamified streak that's less effective than actually creating the constant conditions for enhancing awareness.
It becomes another task, an obligation. And now it's one more thing to manage. And it, for me, immediately feels exhausting because it's just one more thing I got to fucking keep track of. And no.
Yeah. Whereas if instead it's around like living the life that you want to live and living the behaviors that are important to you, suddenly it's really easy, right? Like, Corey, you're going to go on vacation, you're going to write, not because like I'm on vacation, therefore I don't write. It's like, no, part of my experience throughout life is writing. And Justin, for you, it's like previously probably, and I've run into this too, is like, oh, I sit down and I meditate. And if I did 10 minutes, like check. But if instead we're like, no, actually, I'm just going to be more present in my life, then it looks really different. I think it's the same, right? For like exercise, for example, this could be something that's like, oh, I have to work out every single day for 20 minutes. And it could also be like, oh, I like to be in connection with my body. And so I have 20 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm not like working out. I'm just actually being more in my body and sort of like living the behaviors that are important to me and creating the space that's conducive to having that. And sometimes I show up in the ways that really resonate. And sometimes it's a little bit more finicky. Yeah, habits, I think, it's a controlling metric. It's a gamified controlling metric that makes us feel like I am going to collect all the things and therefore I am succeeding. It honestly screams of arrival fallacy for me. That there's this idea that it's like I do all the things properly and correctly and therefore I will be happy. And it's like, spoiler alert, that ain't true.
There's another piece to this though that I want to make sure we don't conflate, which is like setting boundaries versus setting a habit goal. So like with like meditation, for example, I know people who they meditate for 90 minutes. The reason they set it at 90 minutes is so that they don't continue meditating all fucking day and get nothing else done. Right? Versus if you say, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes. Well, now you're watching the clock the whole fucking time of like, oh, 8 minutes, 9 minutes. Oh, okay, cool. I hit my 10-minute mark versus saying, I am going to meditate because I want to until the bell rings, which then is a signal of like, okay, I have other things I now need to go about my day and focus on. There's a huge distinction. Okay. Like, with my writing, right? Like I said, I block the first half of my day for writing. The reason I don't necessarily block the whole day, although some days I do, is because that means I will get nothing else done. Right. And you all know I am bad enough about responding to messages as it is. And that is when I'm like, okay, on, Tuesdays at 3, that's when I check all my fucking messages or some shit. Like that is, I put those boundaries in place so that I can work on other things, because otherwise all I would do would be right. And that's a critical distinction I do want to make of setting boundaries that allow you to do other things rather than having the goal be to do this for 10 minutes or hit this for 600 words or whatever.
So if we've taken away people's precious habits, if we just took a sledgehammer to one of the primary tools in everyone's toolkit, what do we have to offer people? I'm imagining a listener that's like, okay, cool, I've been doing this. I've been trying to manage myself into oblivion. I've got my habit tracker. I see what you're saying. I see that I'm trying to manage myself. It feels constricting. I feel in a box. I'd like to not do that anymore, but I'd still like to evolve and move toward a life that I like and feels more aligned. And what the hell do I do if I'm not just constructing habits?
Check out my coaching page, corywilkesociety.com. No. I mean, you can, obviously. We all do coaching, but little call to action, little CTA. My thing, man, is like, it kind of comes down to what are your values? What is your core value, or at least your top values? What does a life aligned with those values look like? Like, flesh that out first. What does that life look like? Who is that version of you? What do they do differently than you today? Identify that gap and then say, okay, what bridge can I build? What commitments will it take to help me become the person I want to be and to build the life I want to have built? What is that bridge?
And I identify the habits in that life and I start doing those habits.
What are the commitments that will facilitate that life? Because here's the thing. You're
what's,
right. Like,
what's the difference? Because I hear everything you're saying, Corey, and I just know, like, as a former habit addict, it's like, great, I know the life that I want. What that means is I go to the sauna 3 days a week and I work out 5 days a week. And like, you can still overlay habits onto that. So what's the difference between having a bunch of habits versus having a set of commitments?
Sure. So I'll use myself as an example. Fundamentally, I want to write. I want to have cool conversations with cool people, share cool ideas, and do martial arts. Right? Fundamentally, that is what I want to do. Right? So it's just like, by default, I do jujitsu on a daily basis. That isn't a habit. That is a default. Like, this is how I exist in life. But then I set parameters of like, okay, well, I don't go train on certain days so that I have my eatings for, 2 or 3 eatings a week to do something else. Right. But that is my default. I do not look at it as a habit. I look at it as, what is my reality? What is the default way that I am showing up in the world? Because I no longer have anything to track. This is my default. It's like, if you're a bodybuilder, maybe, like, you don't track your fucking meals. You just eat. It is your default way. right? That is a difference. There's nothing to manage. There are no to-dos of just like, this is my default, right?
And what happens if one night I can't get to jujitsu? I can't go.
It doesn't matter.
That's fine.
Because that was your default. This now becomes the exception. That's okay. It's just your default, right? Period. This is how you show up. This is what your life looks like.
But Corey, if it's okay for me not to do this every day, like, what if I just never do it? What if it just never happens?
Then you'll die filled with regret. That's a fucking you problem. Like that's it. Like those are the stakes, right? Like those are the stakes. Either you find a way of folding this in to your way of being by default, or you say, well, unless I optimize and track every little thing, maybe you are the niche exception where you need to micromanage yourself. I am not going to tell you not to do that, because I do know people, like, for example, one of the people I know, she uses Notion to fully manage herself and her business, because she's like, look, I have ADHD and I'm an entrepreneur. It's really easy for me to just completely not manage anything. And rather than hiring a bunch of people that then I have to manage them, I would rather use Notion to manage myself. That, if that works for you, completely cool. Some people thrive on that. But if you are the type of person who you've tried that and that has not worked, such as it feels like most of us, my encouragement to you would be to clarify, what commitments can you make? What default life can you build? And go from there.
There's also, yes. And there's also something around this behavior focused approach that says, this is who I want to be. And so these are the commitments that I make on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And this is how I make time for those things. I think that there's two other things that I would note. One is that part of the reason why I think a lot of us lean towards habits is because that makes us feel like, oh, okay, now I'm getting disciplined. I have accountability. I'm actually making the thing happen. Whereas if we instead are focused on, this is my default and this is the life that I want to live, that forces you to prioritize, how are you spending your time? Most people that I talk to are so busy. They're like, I just don't have enough time, right? I just need more time. And so they're like, oh, I'm going to shove this in on top of everything else. Whereas in fact, if you say, well, if this is who you are, if this is your values aligned life, like Corey outlined, then how does that person show up this week? Suddenly, what does this week look like? Are there things that you had on your list that maybe don't need to get done this week, that maybe don't even need to be on the list, that we can actually completely forgo or offload or delegate or decline? And so I think that oftentimes when we talk about habits, it's adding them on top. And I think there's actually a big case to be made when we think about in an aligned life. A lot of times it's around saying no to things that are automatic things that we're already doing.
Yeah. I'm just thinking the real trick with habits is like everything we're saying can be bastardized by like the universe of habits, right?
Oh,
You
yeah.
can always habitify something. And so that's the risk. And I think for me, the thing that I heard and what you said, Corey, and I encourage people is the real cure to habits is, for me, is like, what do I just want? And like, don't take that question fast, because your head will spew out the like habitified answers, will spit out the self-improvement answers. Take that question really slow, like really sit into it. Let yourself inspect, like, what's the want underneath that want? What's the fundamental want? Let like, I want to run every day to, oh, actually, I want to move every day to, oh, I want to feel good in my body every day. Like, keep root causing down. And then from there, once you're there, like Corey said, figure out what the commitment is, but don't make it a habit. Instead, every day, just consult with if you want to choose that today. There's a really powerful, like, just hack of, in a moment, instead of doing something unconsciously, going, oh, I'm going for a run right now because it's my habit, going, oh, I'm going to choose to go for a run because I want to feel good in my body. And then going, is that what actually feels best to my body versus, oh, actually, I want to go for a walk or I want to do this. But it's slowing down in the moment. Like, the beauty and costs of habits are that they're unconscious. And consciously choosing is kind of the cure of breaking out of the gamification and making sure that it's aligned.
Justin, there's something you said there that I think is really beautiful that I want to push on, which is around kind of engaging in the moments in your life that you're on autopilot and interrupting that. And instead thinking through, oh yeah, just because I run every day, well, why am I doing this? What's the real desire here? And you might discover that, oh, I don't need to go for a 20-minute run. Today, I actually need to rest or stretch or move or eat something or dance it out. And that, I think if there are moments or habits that you've been doing that feel like autopilot, they're just something that I click off the box, that it's gamification, that I'm not even engaged with it, that I don't really understand why I'm doing it anymore. You're in the bastardization of habit, Phil. Come on out.
That's the risk of habits, which is you manage yourself into a life on autopilot, none of which you actually want. That's the risk. All right, I got one last question and then we can see final thoughts. The last question is, okay, so let's go against everything we just said. As coaches, as people who do this work, what are habits that you actually encourage that people develop?
Spending time with themselves and like their own brain. I actually encourage the habit of being reflective, of interrupting, right? Of trying to shift away from being on autopilot and actually taking those moments to be like, how do I want to show up?
Vigorous masturbation. No, journaling probably.
He was so excited to say that. He was so pleased with himself.
Look on his face, and over here I was like, Corey's got something.
He's gonna. I thought it was gonna be good. Instead, it was just shit.
Instead, it was great.
Just shit talking.
Journaling is helpful, but I mean that's similar to what you said, Ricky, of reflecting and taking time to yourself. So is masturbation. Although you can have a crowd.
Oh God, Corey, please leave it alone. Leave it alone, Corey.
But yeah, time to yourself, however you want to spend it, is super important.
That's great.
My mom listens to this.
Yeah,
Hi, Ricky's mom.
My mom does too.
Shit.
Hello, everyone's mother.
Fuck.
Take some time to yourself today. You deserve it.
Oh no, Corey.
Oh, Jesus.
You're so happy with yourself.
It's doctor recommended. I'm the doctor. I'm recommending it.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Quality time.
All right, my turn. I have the talking stick. Corey does not have the talking stick. I think they're all on a similar thread. Like, I think really as like a coach and also in my own life, it's like habits at the meta layer of habits. It's not at the behavioral layer. It's at how are you being with yourself? How are you relating to yourself? So habits like self-acceptance, self-affirmation, self-love, as hokey as they are, like having a habit of being able to like really connect with and hold and appreciate yourself. And no, I don't mean masturbation.
Corey, stop.
I mean
hold yourself.
Like being
tightly.
able to appreciate yourself, There's a whole oh my God. There's a whole set of like inner habits, and a lot of this comes down to like inner awareness and reflection and whatever that is, but not from a box checking mode of like the habit of I want to get to know myself better and have a better relationship with myself is probably the best. I hate you, Corey, so much right now. It's not true, actually. This is my problem. I think this is hilarious, but we're recording a podcast and I'm trying to convey a point.
You got it.
Did I land the point? I don't know.
You did.
Getting to know yourself better and creating the relationship you want with yourself, ideally with how you talk to yourself, but maybe that involves masturbation.
Oh, no.
No clear answers. We are the pro masturbation
Jesus
podcast.
Christ. Jesus Christ. We're going to start sponsoring vibrators.
Brought to you by
Dame
the Jack.
Lalo, come on over. Yeah, I think ultimately a lot of the work that we do here is if you are taking the time to actually interrupt your life and have a moment of saying, what are my values? How am I living a life aligned with them? What am I doing each day that's in support of that? You are so far and beyond most human beings who are living on autopilot, right? So many of us are just kind of like going through the motions with the expectation that later I'll have more time, later I'll have XYZ. If we're present in the now, we already are doing a fucking great job. Not in a navel gazing way, right? I think that's the other thing is that a lot of what we're talking about, it's not navel gazing. It's not just like, what do I want? And then hang out here. It's like we're taking action based on what do I want. And we're living our life based on what I want and who I want to be.
Final thoughts or points on habits?
Download my habit tracker. I'm just kidding.
Nope.
Beautiful. Well, a reminder to like, comment, subscribe, rate, do all those things. Again, it means a lot to us. It genuinely does. Your feedback is like really appreciated. Even like I enjoyed the episode. Also, again, our email is noclearanswers@gmail.com. So if there's any topics you'd like to see us discuss, anything you'd like to see us dive into, hit us up. We're keeping our eyes and ears open for y'all and what's exciting to you. And with that,
Toodles. That's the fun thing about trauma is either it can help you mature or emotionally cripple you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Isn't it so
50-50.
interesting? It's so interesting that there's no medium. It's like you're either going to level up or you're going to get real stuck.
It's like, oh, you're so mature for your age. Thanks.
You're like, well, I had to.